While it's true that Blizzard let these problems linger for years, they did end up fixing us in the end. In particular, they gave a lot of buffs to protection, which, believe me, was the tree that needed it the most.
Two of the more interesting abilities in our protection tree, Redoubt and Reckoning, were both triggered by getting a critical hit scored on you. But let's think about that for a moment. In tanking, getting a critical hit is exactly what you want to avoid, and yet these abilities are triggered by a critical hit. Who came up with this? Why were they even in our tanking tree in the first place? It's as if they were designed to prevent us from tanking. On the plus side, they were changed dramatically in the Burning Crusade. Instead of getting triggered by you getting a critical hit on you, there was a 10% chance anytime anyone hit you to trigger either of these abilities. That made them both useful and viable in tanking. Another thing that they did to help with tanking was the addition of an ability called Spiritual Attunement. It was a passive ability, granted, but whenever we get healed now, we get some mana restored to us. That is perfect for tanking.
One of the best things they did for protection was adding a ranged damage ability that was on demand at the top. Avenger Shield. It's an ability that looks and acts a lot like Chain Lightning, in that it hits multiple enemies. It's a great way to open pulls, it's a great way to get threat on you early on in the battle, it's a great way to recover threat once you lose it. The only problem is the cooldown.
Well, the cooldown and the fact that it's a timed cast ability, and while you're casting it, pretty much you can't block, you can't parry, you can't dodge.
And Avenger Shield isn't the only on-demand damage ability they gave paladins in the Burning Crusade either. At the top of Retribution, there is now an on-demand strike ability, Crusader Strike. It's way different from the beta version of Crusader Strike, but it's still on-demand and it's damage. That's good. Very good. Even better is the way that we actually got Crusader Strike in the first place. You know what they were going to put at the top of Retribution at first? They were going to give us another buff. But when we said that that was lame, they actually listened to us on the forums and made a real change. Now to me, that is a very good sign that there is someone at Blizzard who doesn't hate paladins. And you remember how I was talking about Holy Shock before? How I had a really long cooldown, a punishing mana cost, and didn't do that much damage? Ever since the Burning Crusade came out, it's been buffed little by little. The cooldown got cut in half. They made it so that it actually healed for more than it did damage when you use it as a heal instead of a damage spell. They made it so that it does more damage than Hammer of Wrath or Exorcism, which makes sense considering that it's a talent and neither of those other two spells are. And while it still doesn't do enough healing and still has too long of a cooldown to be considered a viable heal option, the fact that it's been buffed little by little over time, I have to take that as an indication that Blizzard doesn't hate paladins.
There's something else I have to give Blizzard credit for. As I said before, gear got a lot better in the Burning Crusade. Take a look at this piece. Would you believe that this is actually a quest reward? That's right. In the Hellfire Peninsula, there were a lot of quests that got paladins good gear. And this one is in fact a blue. Can you believe that? Plate with spell damage attached to it became a lot more plentiful in the Burning Crusade. Thank goodness. Also, plate with spell crit on it was plentiful in the Burning Crusade, which is important for Holy Paladins since we rely on spell criticals to get mana back.
On top of all these changes to talents and gameplay mechanics, they also gave paladins a bit of a cosmetic boost. Before, all our seals looked the same way, basically the same as the inner fire buff that priests have. But now, each seal has a different graphic associated with it. For instance, Seal of Righteousness still has that old inner fire graphic, but Seal of Light has this glowing symbol above our heads. On top of that, Judgment has a new graphic. Before, it was just this tiny spark of light that would appear on an enemy's face, but now it's this big hammer that smacks the enemy on the head. These graphical changes are a major indication that someone at Blizzard doesn't hate paladins. So, was it all good news? Not quite. I have to admit, there was a lot of good news in the Burning Crusade, but there was also some bad news mixed into it. Two staples of the Paladin's repertoire are Cleanse and Hammer of Justice. They're a Dispel ability and a Stun, respectively. When the Burning Crusade came out, there were so many talents to make various debuffs resist Dispel, and also to make characters resist Stun, so the usefulness of those two abilities really dwindled. they really weren't buffed that much in the Burning Crusade either. Speaking of dispels, they actually gave priests an ability that can dispel Divine Shield. Divine Shield has historically been an absolutely impregnable shield, but now there's something that a player can do to bite through it. Once Divine Shield is gone, paladins pretty much don't have any panic buttons left. Lay on Hands really doesn't count because it's got way too long of a cooldown. And our heals are all interruptible. Holy Shock doesn't count because it's got too long of a cooldown and doesn't heal for enough to count. If we're supposed to be the most defensive class in PvP, then why are they taking away our defenses? There was another problem which was a little bit two-sided. First of all, Blizzard was giving everyone new abilities, and they were trying to give pretty much the same number of new abilities to each class. And nearly half of the new abilities they gave to paladins came before level 60. For instance, our taunt was available at level 14. So that really didn't leave paladins with much to look forward to while they were leveling up from 60 to 70. Because this is two-sided, I have to give it both a heart and a skull, because on the one hand, low-level paladins could tank and that's a sign that they don't hate paladins, but on the other hand, we had so little to look forward to going from 60 to 70. And that's an indication that they don't like paladins. There are only 3 abilities: Crusader Aura, a new seal, and Avenging Wrath. Crusader Aura was fun because it increases your mount speed, but it really wasn't that useful in combat. The new damage seal gave paladins something to complain about, because the Alliance side one really wasn't that good. It was just a stackable debuff that you could get on an enemy, and in quick fights it really doesn't do any good, so it was pretty useless in player versus player. Avenging Wrath was a kind of a berserker ability. It increased all our damage by 30%, but there's a problem. It's all too easily dispellable and very visible when a paladin has it on, so that isn't very useful either. In fact, the majority of the classes actually have an option for dispelling. Hunters have Arcane Shot, Priests have Dispel, Shaman have Purge, Warriors have Shield Slam, Warlocks have a pet that can dispel, and Mages have Spell Steal. That's 2/3 of the classes that are out right now. Every one of them has an option to remove Avenging Wrath from us. And when you cast Avenging Wrath, you get Forbearance, a debuff that prevents us from using our shield. You know, this really doesn't look like that good a setup. As lame as what I've mentioned so far is, there's something even worse that came out with the Burning Crusade.